I made myself a little script today. Today we're going to talk about utopia. It has a strange but poetic etymology, so let's look at that first. The U in utopia means not or non, and topia means space. So utopia in its etymological meaning is a non-place. The reason that this may seem like a contradiction is because most of our thoughts about utopia are probably actually filled with images. Art, media, design has done a consistently convincing job of helping utopia to be as concrete as possible. First in our imagination, and secondly in our actions, which are frequently fueled by our dreams of utopia, the things we hope for. Our dream of something better is at the core of who we are. The author C.S. Lewis, famous for meticulously conjuring up and describing the utopian world of Narnia that some of you may be familiar with, he said this. He said, "If we find ourselves with a desire that nothing in this world can satisfy, the most probable explanation is that we were made for another world." The German philosopher and Marxist Ernst Bloch is the writer you want to go to if you're interested in how utopia has played out in the arts and how it's in the arts that, for better or for worse, we've been helped first to imagine the world as we want it and then to act on those desires. Bloch argued that our utopian consciousness, as he called it, was not only a way to have hope for the future, but actually to understand why we behave the way we do today. And there's this great quote there's this book that's out of a series produced by MIT and Whitechapel Art Gallery from a series called Documents in Contemporary Art. And it actually opens with a passage from Ernst Bloch, which says this. It's a little bit thick, but I'll try to walk you through it. It says, "Utopian consciousness wants to look far into the distance, but ultimately only in order to penetrate the darkness so near it, of the just-lived moment in which everything that is both drives and is hidden from itself. In other words, we need the most powerful telescope, that of polished utopian consciousness, there it is, in order to penetrate precisely the nearest nearness." So I told you I'd walk you through it, but basically what he's saying in that passage is that we need, that utopia sort of functions as this telescope that helps us to dream about the future but think about the present, like cut into the things of the present through thinking about the things that we aspire for in the future. Our relationship to utopia and utopian thinking really looks like a powerful thing, doesn't it? It's a thing that helps us to conjure up new worlds. It is powerful. It's just like heat. It's just like the metaphor that I gave you about heat. It's a powerful thing, but it's also a neutral thing. It can go either direction. You can use it to build up, or you can use it to destroy. As I told you earlier in this semester, you are in fact maybe some of the most powerful people on this campus. After all, you yield the power of imagination. And I know that sounds really flowery, but what I really mean is you yield the power to make utopia manifest. You're able to conjure it up and help people not only to get there with their minds, but then to act on it, which is pretty powerful. What happens when that power spills outside of its limits, though? What happens when it gets really big? What happens when utopia is enacted with minimal restraint or minimal regulation, either on your own or communally? Well, lots of people make lots of money. That's actually what happens. People make money. But the way our global economy is set up, when a few people live in excess, live with a lot more than they need, many other people have to be poor. So this movie that I'm going to show you is perhaps the most important thing you will see in college. That might sound like I'm really puffing this thing up, but if you give yourself the time to watch it, I think you will agree and actually just meditate on what you're watching. It's only 60 minutes. I think you might agree that it could potentially be transformative of the way you're thinking, but also the way that you see what you're studying and where you're going with those studies. If you let it be, it could be the most transformative thing that you've seen in college, that you're going to see in college. Movie's called The Economics of Happiness, and it makes a case for how different types of economies affect the happiness of those people they propose to benefit. The scholars on the video lay out the pitfalls of globalization, which is the dominant economic model that your art, design, education, and research practice will have to tap into in order to be successful, or at least that's what we're being told, that's what we need to tap into, a globalized economic model. But this film also makes a case for smallness, for localness, and relationships over consumption. There's an extended passage from a book called Ecological Literacies by a scholar named David Orr, who's actually a professor at Oberlin College, that I would like to read to you. I'm going to put it up on the screen here too, but it's long. It's about a page and a half that I'm going to read you, and then think about it within the context of the film in terms of the proposal that he's making about how liberal arts education, which is what you are getting right now, should actually teach you how to work within this anti-globalized world, a different type of economy. So the passage reads, and it starts here at the bottom of this page. It says, "A third task of the liberal arts is to provide a sober view of the world, but without inducing despair. For many college freshmen, acquaintance with the realities of the late 20th century come as a shock. This is not the happy era they had heard described by the $120 billion per year advertising industry and by any number of feckless politicians. This is a time of danger, enemy, suffering, crack on the streets, changing climate." Oh, this was written in 1992, by the way, but this is still sort of, a lot of this, just substitute all of the stuff that's happening now. Changing climate, war, hunger, homelessness, spreading toxics, garbage barges plying the 7 seas, desertification, poverty, and the permanent threat of Armageddon. Ours is the age of paradox. The modern obsession to control nature through science and technology is resulting in a less predictable and less bountiful natural world. Material progress was supposed to have created a more peaceful world. Instead, the 20th century has been a time of unprecedented bloodshed in which 200 million have died. Our economic growth has multiplied wants, not satisfactions. Amidst the staggering quantity of artifacts, what economists call abundance, there is a growing poverty of the most desperate sort. How many students' counseling services convey this sense of peril or obligation? The often cited indifference and apathy of students is, I think, a reflection of the prior failure of educators and educational institutions to stand for anything beyond larger and larger endowments and an orderly campus. The result is a growing gap between the real world and the academy, and between the attitudes and the aptitudes of its graduates and the needs of their time. Finally, a genuine liberal arts education will equip a person to live well in a place. To a great extent, formal education now prepares its graduates to reside, not to dwell. And this is an important comparison here. The difference is important. The resident is a temporary and rootless occupant who mostly needs to know where the banks and stores are in order to plug in. The inhabitant and a particular habitat cannot be separated without doing violence to both. The sum total of violence wrought by people who do not know who they are because they do not know where they are in the global environmental crisis. To reside is to live as a transient and as a stranger to one's place, and inevitably to some part of the self. The inhabitant and place mutually shape each other. Residents shaped by outside forces become merely consumers, supplied by invisible networks that damage their places and those of others. The inhabitants in the local community are parts of a system that meets real needs for food, materials, economic support, and sociability. The resident's world, on the contrary, is a complicated system that defies order, logic, and control. The inhabitant is part of a complex order that strives for harmony between human demands and ecological processes. The resident lives in a constant blizzard of possibilities engineered by other residents. The life of the inhabitant is governed by the boundaries of sufficiency, organic harmony, and by the discipline of paying attention to minute particulars. For the resident, order begins from the top and proceeds downward as law and policy. For the inhabitant, order begins with the self and proceeds outward. Knowledge for the resident is theoretical and abstract, akin to training. For inhabitants, knowledge is the art of living aimed towards wholeness. Those who dwell can only be skeptical of those who talk about being global citizens before they have attended to the minute particulars of living well in their place. And if you just want a quick breakdown of that last part right there where he's comparing the inhabitant and the resident, he's talking about what the inhabitant does in relation to the place where they are and what the resident does in relationship to the place where they are. So the inhabitant has roots, the inhabitant is looking to be connected, the inhabitant is looking to put back, whereas the resident is there to be ruled and essentially take what they need until they don't need it anymore and then they leave. Right? When you're watching the movie, pay close attention to how the story of the Ladakh is told. The Ladakh is a group of people from Kashmir, which is a region that's north of India. And I want you to also pay attention to their arc actually in the movie, their story arc, how change came to that community and what caused it. And then pay attention to a particular scholar, all the scholars, obviously, they're all saying important things, but for our particular case in thinking about how a utopia could function and how we could contribute to constructing the imagining of a utopia and actually the making of a utopia, pay attention to how the scholar Vandana Shiva talks about centralization particularly. And these are the two questions that you're going to have for this week for discussion. The first one is, what role will my art play in the imagining of utopia and the making of it? And the second one is, how can my creative practice be local and still be successful? And you're going to have to think about local not necessarily just as like where you live and the people around you, but as a rooted type of existence, a way of being in the world in a rooted manner. So that's it. Like I said, if you watch the film with your whole heart and your whole mind, I think you're going to really be impacted by it. And if you have any questions about anything that's due or anything that's coming up, by all means, get in touch with your TA or get in touch with me. We're getting to the end here, so we just want to make sure that everybody's ducks are in order and that we can feel good about how well we weathered this particular unusual storm. So take care and see you next week.